Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back into week 4, Gridiron Eve. I'm John Vogel. He's Mike Huesmann, and this is Gridiron Eve. As you all have known over the last couple weeks, we've been pretty down on spot with a lot of these picks, a lot of different things, discussing a lot of really good college football stuff over here. And it's always nice when we're both in the studio, and we have this opportunity to debate these picks back and forth, and one of us doesn't have to carry the show. You know what I'm saying? It's always really nice when that happens. So I'm really happy that we're both here tonight, and I guess I shall extend the laurel wreath before we get started. So how are you doing tonight, Mike?
Doing well. It is always nice to be here to talk about a topic which we both enjoy so much and enjoy agreeing and occasionally disagreeing over. And I think, as usual, we had an interesting week 3 behind us. I felt like it was one of those weeks where we may not have learned much about the top 10 teams, but those teams in that 11 to 25 range, we might have learned a lot about. I don't know if um, BYU is a team we were both high on. Maybe they're not as good as we thought. I think Miami lost, didn't look great on offense, but
Yep.
like I said, Texas A&M's D looks really good. So I don't know if Miami's as bad as we thought. Utah looked solid. The Vols looked very impressive against Akron in the leading up
I mean,
to
it was Akron, so
yeah.
it
But
was
they
Akron.
they did what they had to do though in leading up to what will be their biggest game so far tomorrow. Um, Wake Forest Liberty was a very interesting game, one that I would imagine a lot of people didn't watch, but they should have. Um,
Yeah, what about
and
that kid Salter that stepped in for old Charlie Brewer who got hurt over there?
I know,
I mean,
yep,
he
he
looked
did.
legit.
Yeah,
I was impressed with him.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, uh, Another game that I think the final score might be misleading to some people. Texas UTSA. For the first 35, 40 minutes of that game, it was a nail biter. UTSA
Mhm.
stuck with them for a long
Yeah.
time. They did a lot of good things. Um, and then I think in making our picks, we should probably talk about the two games that we disagreed on last week, one of which you were right on, one of which I was.
Hmm.
I was higher on the Irish, and I took them by, I believe it was 11 and a half over
Yeah,
Cal,
yeah,
which
they
they
were
did not.
11.5 point favorites over Cal,
Yeah,
and they
and they
won by
look,
7, which
yeah, they look poor in the first half on offense. With the new QB Pine, they couldn't get much going, um, and like Cal has done in a lot of games, even games they've lost, their defense has kept it pretty close. Justin Wilcox is doing some good things there. Despite their win-loss record, he's consistently a name we sometimes see as an option for some quote
mhm,
unquote better jobs.
yeah.
And then the game that I was right on, the Nittany Lions took it to Auburn, and they did a
Yeah,
lot of
yeah, they
good
did. That
things.
was
Yeah,
one of the worst showings I think I've ever seen Auburn put on turf. That was it was
they
so
didn't do.
abysmal
Yeah, they
in
didn't do much
so many
right.
different ways.
Yeah,
Oh man, it was so bad. I don't think I've ever seen Auburn go into a big game like that and look that bad. Um, that was absolutely
yeah,
just that was mind blowing. Because I think
yeah. It
everybody
was
thought that was going to be a close game. The spread wasn't that far off, was it? It was
no,
it was like less than a touchdown.
it was. Yeah, but I
Yeah,
think I took it
they're
at
at
5.5.
home.
Yeah, and I
Penn State
expected
is
it would.
struggling with Purdue.
Yeah, I expected it to be like a 31-21 game, not Penn State winning by more than 30 like they did.
Yeah, that was insane. That was an absolutely
Yeah,
insane matchup, and how that all turned out. But that's how it goes sometimes. So
yeah. Auburn
Auburn
is going to be
Auburn
in.
showed us who they are.
We're going to get to Auburn later. We will be talking about Auburn later tonight. So,
Well, let's not
yeah,
dwell too much on the past. We are tied at 15 points. So when we disagree
we
with each
are.
other on this show, we put points on it. So far, nobody's put more than 5. I think we just stuck with 5. It's been pretty easy to keep it that way.
It's
As we
simple
get
at every
farther into
game.
the season, right? As we get farther into the season, we might have to play around with that a little bit,
Yeah,
but we'll worry about that later, not now. So
that's true.
the first game coming up on this is on your picks, Mike. Go ahead and tell everybody what your first pick is.
I will say, I'll actually skip through my list. Since we were talking about Auburn, I will just skip through it. I like Auburn against Mizzou to cover this week.
Oh my God!
They
after this showing,
I think they cover the 7 points against Mizzou. I just don't see them looking as bad as they did. And for some of the reasons you liked them last week, they're pretty good in the trenches. And I don't think there's any reasonable way that they will get away from Tank Bigsby like they did last week. Like, they didn't even start giving the guy the ball. He's the bell cow. He's the franchise. And they just got away from him. I don't see that happening again. Another interesting thing about them, really interesting, we're going to see a new QB. TJ Finley is hurt. Auburn has 5 QBs on the roster, only 2 of which are healthy right now. Robbie Ashford will be making his first start. I think some people weren't sure if it would be him or Calzada. Turns out Calzada has a shoulder injury that is worse than we think, and he might be out for the rest of the season. That was a report I saw today.
I was wondering why he wasn't playing.
Yeah, he may have to have surgery that will end his season. I did see that. So Ashford's going to start, and the other QB, Holton, his last name starts with a G, but he's never started a game before. I don't believe he's taken a snap for Auburn in a game, but Robbie Ashford's going to start. And I like Auburn to handle Mizzou. I took them -7. That's not a huge spread by any means. Mizzou is a team that is 2-1. We have seen them beat Louisiana Tech in a high-scoring game. It was close. They pulled away late.
Yep.
They absolutely got manhandled by Kansas State. And then they beat Abilene Christian, FCS team, not very convincingly.
Which is expected. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I guess, and the game's in Jordan Hare. So I like Auburn to win by that 7.
These were all the reasons that I listed last week with them going to that Penn State game. They're at home. They got Tank Bigsby. They're not going to get away from him. Yeah. But if you've noticed, over the entirety of Tank Bigsby's career at Auburn, they've squandered it 100%. They misuse him. They forget that he's on the roster. He disappears in games because they don't give him the ball. And they've asked him to be a better receiver, which is going to help him as a pro prospect. But, especially if you go back to that South Carolina game last year, that South Carolina game, they had Tank Bigsby, and they didn't give him the ball most of the game. And they lost that game handedly at the end. And it's because they get away from this Brian Harrison era. They get away from running the football, and they're like, oh, well, we got, TJ Finley. He's a quarterback who can throw it a mile, but can't hit the red side of a barn. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
I was in the stands for that. I was in the stands for that game, and I remember leaving the stadium, and I was like, Bigsby had a pretty good game. I bet he had around 100 yards, and his yards per carry was pretty good. He ran for a touchdown. And then I pulled up my phone to look at the stats, and I remember going to myself, holy shit, he got 185 yards. Like, how did that happen? And that's him, though. He always produces when you consistently get him involved. He's not one of those guys that you don't see his yards per carry being around 1.5 yards too. He's not getting many carries for a loss. He doesn't fumble the ball much, and he usually pushes the pile forward. I mean, if you involve him, he's not failing usually.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing, though, is that I worry about is with Bigsby is he's a downhill type guy. I guess you can kind of run stretch with him a little bit. And I think they really try to push the outside boundary too much with him. And when it's the strength of that team to me is the interior. It's between the tackles. And so I wish that they would rely on that a little bit more. And I think that's what kind of struck me the most about the Auburn Penn State game last week was how they got away from that. They kept trying to hit the boundary. They kept trying to stretch Penn State out. And it's like, look, just man them up, run up the middle, please.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. And I think that I'm not going to go against you against your pick. I'm not going to put anything on it because this is one of those games that I looked at and I said, I have no idea what's going to happen in this game, and I don't want to even touch it.
Absolutely.
But
and I think that
I did want to play devil's advocate.
Okay. I think that's I think you're probably smart to stay away from it from a sense that neither of these teams are consistent. We don't know which of these teams is going to show up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Right.
Other than I'm banking that Missouri's run defense is not going to show up.
Yeah.
And that's largely what I'm basing my pick off of.
And that very well could happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
Like you said, these teams are woefully inconsistent. They have both of them have weapons, both of them have things they can do well, but you just don't know which one's going to pop out. You don't know which one they're going to work with. So
like I was looking at.
All right, so
move on, please.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying, we're back to our Bigsby thing. I was looking at a list today, and they had him as the 10th best running back prospect for this draft. If you're in the top 10 at that position for the draft, but even so, even if you are 10, you should be getting a lot more touches than he got last week. You should be included in the offense a lot more.
So, my first pick, I think, that I'm going with this week is going to be, I like Baylor 2.5 over Iowa State. I like Baylor straight up in this game.
Yeah.
I know, I talked down on them when they were playing BYU, and I had those concerns with them going into that game. And I took BYU to beat them straight up. But that's not to say I don't think Baylor's not a good team. I think Baylor's a very good team. I like them better than I like Iowa State, mostly because when I watched Iowa play Iowa State, I saw a lot of inconsistency on offense. I saw a lot of mistakes that were made, and there's not a lot that they can do to rely on this quarterback that they have right now. I'm blanking on his name.
Hunter Deckers.
Into the good book here.
Hunter Deckers.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's an Iowa kid.
I was getting into the good book. No, and it's not because he's a lefty or anything like that. Like that threw me off a little bit too, but it has nothing to do with that. It was just more of he was very woefully inconsistent, inaccurate with the ball, made a lot of bad decisions. And so you don't have a Breece Hall on that team right now that you can rely on to punch the ball on offense. I think Baylor has a really good defense, and to hold Iowa to 7 points right now is not a big deal. So honestly, I like Baylor winning this game straight up. I don't know why they're the underdogs, to be honest. I saw that and I was like, I'm jumping all over that one.
Yeah, I agree. I like Baylor to win this game, and that's despite some deficiencies we've seen. Tay McWilliams and Quaylon Jones have ran the ball pretty well this year. Shapen has not looked as good as I expected. I haven't been too impressed with what we've seen out of him, but their defense has played pretty well on D. Their Randolph and Maxwell off the edges have rushed the passer pretty well, and their D-backs have been doing an all right job. So even in that, the BYU game where we saw them lose, their defense looked all right, and they've. I just expect them to have enough to get it done against an inconsistent offense like we've seen out of the Cyclones.
Yeah, I think Baylor's defense is a lot better than people want to give them credit for. They're consistent. I mean, I know it doesn't sound like it's a big deal because we watched BYU get manhandled, by Oregon, but they did hold that BYU offense to 20 points, and then gave up the overtime. But this is a very solid defense. They have a lot of really good players that are going to play at the next level. Guys that are going to
They
go,
do.
the first few rounds next year in the draft at linebacker, at nose tackle. I think the safeties are really good too. So there's a lot of really good things there that I think gives them the advantage, even with a struggling offense. You're going to be able to figure out a way and get it done over Iowa State.
I agree. Yeah, 100%.
So let's go ahead and move on to your next pick, good sir.
So, in the battle of the unbeatens, in the game that should have been college game day, I like the Jayhawks minus 7.5 over Duke. And I will shamelessly put that plug in for our good friend, Mr. Nystrom, who hopefully is watching.
I'm sure he is. He's been texting the entire time. Vogel!
Yeah. But I do like Kansas. Kansas is following almost the exact same blueprint we saw Lance Leopold do at Buffalo. They are building up the O-line. They're getting really tough and salty, and they're running the ball quite well. They have the best Jay Daniels quarterback in the country, and there's three of them to pick from here. One of which we saw last night.
There's not just one. It's not one. There's three.
Yeah. There are three. Devin Neal is a good running back, and Kansas looks like a team who, I'm not under some illusion they're going to win 10 or 11 games, but they're a team that might get 7 or 8. They're going to be in most games. They're playing very fundamental. They're blocking well. They're not turning the ball over. And, oftentimes we see decision making as just a quarterback, related comment, but everybody on their team seems to be making good decisions. They're not getting beat on defense. They're not making dumb mistakes that let people get behind them. Leopold is really doing a good job there. And Duke has made progress. Mike Elko was one of the top D coordinators in the country at A&M and Notre Dame before that. He's seen it all. I think he will be a successful head coach and get Duke back to where they were in the good Cutcliffe years. They dropped off the last two, but before that, they'd been better than we'd ever remembered them since Spurrier had been there in the late 80s, most probably. But, despite Duke's improvements as well, I think Kansas at home covers that 7.5.
I haven't watched much Duke this year. I haven't
No
gotten
one,
to them
no
yet.
one has. That's okay. Yeah, no one has.
No. So I know that they beat Northwestern, and then I know that Northwestern went and lost to Southern Illinois the week, the getting to the very next game. And so I can't really speak too much on this game because I don't know, but I have watched Kansas. Because I think Kansas has been the most surprising story in college football this year to start off, at least at the beginning of the season. Taking down West Virginia in the fashion that they did, and then going in there and beating Houston the very next week. Huge, monumental games for that program. And you're right, Lance Leopold, he's doing it the right way. He's building up from the trenches. And, that's how you build championship football programs is you win in the trenches, and then you build the playmakers on top of that.
Yeah.
And if you remember, we talked about one of the dudes they have in the trenches. I want to say it was week 1 broadcast when we were talking about Kansas. Because he brought over Mike Nowitzki, who would be he's a very, very solid. He's really becoming a good NFL prospect, I think. But he's a very solid college center, and brought with him to Buffalo because he likes his leadership and he liked what he brought to the program on a personal level. So Leopold definitely knows what he's doing, and it's showing right now at Kansas.
Certainly. Yeah, I don't think there's any doubts that, whether or not people see or where people see them at the end of the year doesn't matter. So far, they've been one of the biggest surprises in the country of anybody. I don't think there'd be any doubt.
100%, yeah.
Duke would be on that list too, I guess. But we would have been less surprised if Duke was 3-0 as opposed to Kansas, based on who these teams played to start their season.
We are less surprised, straight up. I think that's kind of the point, right? We didn't like Duke being 3-0 at this point, having the win over Northwestern was a surprise, but it's not as surprising as Kansas, because when was the last time Kansas was 3-0? It's been a long time.
My guess it would have been 2008, the year after they won the Orange Bowl, because they had lost one game the year they won the Orange Bowl. Then the next year they started 5-0. Then they lost the rest of their games, and that's when the wheels fell off of the Mangino era for largely off the field reasons. He got railroaded, but we don't need to go into that right now. But
no, definitely not. That's
fine. But the year after that, they started extremely well. Then the wheels fell off the bus.
Right. So, yeah, I think that's the most surprising story in college football right now, is just the fact that Kansas is that good, and they are everything that we've seen so far is advertised. Their offense is magnificent, and yet the QB Daniels, he looks awesome. As a college quarterback, he is awesome. Just electric playmaker, everything that you want. So I love that guy too. I think that Kansas is a really good team. So,
what's your second game, John?
So my second game this is one of those schools I've been hyping up all year. All right, this started all the way back in January when I was, we were covering the transfer portal very heavily. We were doing a lot of that kind of stuff. And, you were part of that team as well on Football Sapient. We were working on all of that. So that year, observing the transfer portal, paying attention to everything, back in as, the season ended and players started jumping all over the place. One of the teams that I noticed that was killing the transfer portal was South Florida. South Florida looks like a totally different team this year. And I know they got beat handedly by BYU. I was expecting that. And I said it back then in week 1, right before that game on this show. I said, this is a really good team, but we're not going to see it yet. Not this week. BYU is going to be too much for them to handle. And guess what? We saw it this week, right? When they played Florida. Pardon me, dealing with something over here. So
you're good.
We saw this past week against Florida was not a game that was indicative of how bad Florida is. It was actually something that tells us how good South Florida is. That's why they were able to stay in that game, because they are a very solid team from the ground up. I think the quarterback is ultimately going to hold them back. I don't like, Bohannon as much as we've discussed before. I think maybe for what that offense is doing, they're doing a great job. And they're utilizing all of his strengths and trying to minimize his weaknesses. Doing a great job with all of that. But this is a very good team, and they are 14.5-point underdogs to Louisville this week. And I really like South Florida on that, especially with the inconsistency, the lack of offense, the lack of production that we've seen from Louisville all year. This is just another one of these games where South Florida can stamp, make their mark, and say, look, we're here, guys. We are a really good team.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. This is a game I looked at that spread. I'm not going to touch this because I think Louisville will win. I absolutely.
Louisville wins. Yes,
yeah. But
I don't think it's by. I don't think it's by 2 touchdowns.
No, I do not either. And USF, there's no denying they're improved. I for me, the underlying question for them, that bigger picture, isn't are they improved? They are. It's will they get enough wins for Jeff Scott to keep his job after this season? I don't think anybody knows the answer. Yeah, I don't think anybody knows the answer to that right now. If I had to bet right now, I'd probably lean towards no, but that could go a lot of different ways. I was looking at their schedule, and it's not too easy. I mean, they have Louisville, then you have East Carolina, you go to Cincinnati, you have Tulane, you go to Houston. That's a tough stretch they have the next month. I mean, none of those games are gimmies. Lightens up a little. You go to Temple after that. Then you have SMU, Tulsa, UCF to end the year, the war on I-4. but that schedule is a bear the next month. And if they get too far behind the chains, I wonder if they make a change during the season earlier than we expect. I don't know the answer to that, but it is curious.
If they go in here and they're competitive with Louisville,
Yeah.
if it's a one possession game with 2 minutes to go and Louisville is trying to, put the finishing touch on this game, which I think it very well could be at tomorrow. I think you have a very competitive showing against Florida on the road. You went to Florida and you hung with them the entire game and almost pulled it off at the end, almost came back.
Yep.
You'll have a really good showing against Louisville if that all happens, as I think it will tomorrow. I think that really I know that it's not in the win column. I know it doesn't. I know it goes in the loss column, but I honestly think the program looks at that and says it considers those wins because those are very, very, very important games. I mean, this South Florida, this could become a rivalry. Especially with all the expansion going on in college football, if South Florida can sell it enough, this is something that South Florida could use to punch in their ticket to get to a better conference. So, I think that he's fine for now. I think they're going to be really competitive. They've got a really good team.
I agree and I disagree. I agree on the pick. I don't agree that they're a really good team. I think they're improved, and I think they're decent. Even good, I would be hesitant to say that just because we haven't seen enough out of them yet. For a big reason you said, I just don't trust Jerry Bohannon to get things done at this point. I don't know what he's going to do.
I think that's the only thing that really holds me back about them is him. But everything else on the roster, I mean,
their defense is very improved. They added a lot of key pieces on the defense that were
some of the key transfers that came in have already stepped up. Getting Antonio Greer back for another year was crucial. And I mean, they've got playmakers on that offense too. Jaron Mangum is a beast at running back. I really like Brian Batty too. Brian Batty's really stepped up this year.
Yeah.
So you've got a running game at the very least. You can kind of play keep away in this, and Louisville has not played, keep away very well this year. So I like
they have not. Yeah,
I really like South Florida hanging with them, covering that 14.5, and probably surrendering the game at the end.
Yeah.
Your third pick, good sir. This is probably one I'm going to disagree with.
Going with the home state Gophers to cover in East Lansing over the Spartans. Yep, I think Minnesota is 2.5-point favorites on the road, which is rare. In the Big Ten, you don't Ohio State, Michigan, etc. They're going to be favored on the road, but most of the rest of the rest ofs are not going to be favored on the road in that conference. But part of this has to do with their schedule, and they've not played anybody tough. Minnesota has been by far the best team in the Big Ten West so far this year. Mo Ibrahim is playing very well, like he was before he got injured. Potts is a good backup running back. You have a quarterback, a center, and both guards who are in their 6th year of college.
I mean, are we really considering Tanner Morgan a quarterback, or is he?
We are for
one of those dudes that's overstayed his welcome.
Maybe he probably has overstayed his welcome, but the way they use him, he's not. I don't want to say he's not winning games, but he's not losing them either. The one worry I do have for Minnesota is Chris Ottman-Bell, their best receiver, is out for the rest of the season. He went down last week with a non-contact injury, and right when that happened, if you had experience watching football, you knew that when you saw the replay, it's like, that doesn't look good. He's going to be out for a while, and he indeed will miss the rest of the season. But wish him well and a speedy recovery. Meanwhile, Michigan State went out west to Washington and got destroyed. They didn't do many things right in that game. I think they're a better team than that game indicated.
100%.
And I think Washington was atrocious last year. I think last year was the aberration, though. They're not a great team, but that's a pretty good program who's consistently going to get in decent talent anyway.
Yeah.
The Jimmy Lake era was just poor all around. I think he's one of those guys who's a solid defensive coordinator, not a good head coach. But Washington looked good against Michigan State. They manhandled in every phase of the game. They were better, and partly because of watching that and how Minnesota's done, I'm picking the Gophers here. I do think, though, we will learn a lot about the Gophers in this game, being that this is the first real test they've had so far. This is the first proper, legitimate bowl caliber team who has a top-notch coach, and we might know what we're going to get out of Minnesota this year.
That's exactly the point that I was going to bring up. Was right there. Was we haven't seen this team play anybody outside of New Mexico State. I'm trying to think of the other two that they played.
It was New Mexico State, Colorado, and
that's right, Colorado last week.
Yeah, Colorado last week. And in between that, they had, I believe it was one of the Missouri Valley teams. It was FCS. Was it Western Illinois?
West, maybe.
Was it Western Illinois?
I'm getting there.
Okay.
Western Illinois. That's it.
I thought it was
so we've seen them play. Yeah. We've basically seen them play two FCS opponents, essentially, and because I know that I'm
New Mexico State is worse than a lot of.
Yeah,
that is an accurate description.
I'm throwing shade, but so we've seen them do that, and then we saw them play Colorado, and Colorado has had a lot of issues all season long.
Colorado
even just simple offense.
Colorado was probably the worst P5 team.
Right now,
they probably are. Yeah, I don't know that there's anybody.
They've looked very bad this year.
Yeah,
and I think
Carl Durrell,
all the trans.
I think Carl Durrell is the next P5 head coach that gets fired. Barring,
I think so.
Barring some wild scandal for purely on the field reasons, Durrell's the next guy.
Yeah. But that's kind of so we've seen him dominate all that, which is good. And I like all of that. But I think when we watched Michigan State play Washington last week, what was it that killed Michigan State? It was Michael Penix being able to push the ball down the field accurately, hitting his receivers in stride, working down the sideline, stretching them vertically, stretching them both ways. That Washington, from an offensive game plan, had Michigan State on the ropes the entire game.
They did.
And it was the way that they created matchups it was unreal to watch. I had not seen anything to that level in college football, I don't think, in a very, very long time. But they created matchups with these exotic shifts, moving players all over, just straight up motioning, from motions to, okay, we're going to shift everybody and move to a totally different formation.
It's interesting.
And all of this to get these matchups.
It's interesting you say that because they're the former high school coach in me will say that they're using a lot of wing T concepts out of shotgun. We saw Gus Malzahn do this at Auburn too, where you're using a lot of tight ends, H-backs, and you're moving guys around so that you can get angles and advantages in the run game.
Yeah,
and
that was the thing is that they created one-on-one matchups that they wanted in the passing game too. It was a masterful performance from every angle that you look at it. And so they had them worried about being beat on the edges. They had them worried about being beat deep, and they had no idea where the next shot was going to come from. So with that being said, I'm not so sure Minnesota can put up that kind of an offensive plan, nor that kind of threat in this game to that Michigan State team. And I think that's what concerns me. This is another one of those games, honestly, I look at it and I'm like, I'm not going to touch that because, again, too much unknown with Michigan State right now. I don't know what Minnesota's going to do against what they're going to look like against the Big Ten. If that were to be my concern, it's that Minnesota offensively can't do what Washington did last week, and that is by mixing up all the different looks, hitting them from every possible angle. Literally, I think if you look at Phoenix's passing chart from that game, it's going to be pretty darn evenly distributed to the 9 parts of the field. You know what I'm saying? Where that ball was going. Deep, middle, deep right, deep left. I want to say he had a touchdown to almost every zone. It was insane to watch.
Yeah, he's been one of the most impressive transfer QBs we've seen. In talking, or I made a tweet. I think we talked about how many of the starting FBS QBs are transfers. 51, 52, something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah, it was huge.
And he's been one of the most impressive so far this year. There aren't many guys who, over their whole body of work, 2-3 games, have looked better than him. You could probably count on one hand, if any have, and you might even make the case he's been the best one. He's been impressive.
You can. I think you can. And it's a lot of the same type of player that we saw in 2020, was it? The COVID year, right before he got hurt?
2020.
Like, that's who we're seeing right now. And if we talked about him last week, you had mentioned, you basically just said exactly what you did. You can make the argument he's one of the best transfer quarterbacks. And, I argued against you because we hadn't seen him in a real game yet. And we did. I mean, taking on Michigan State is not a very light challenge. It's not something that it's just like any other team.
And that's one of the biggest. That's the biggest L I've taken.
He played really well.
He did. That's one of the biggest L's I've taken. I thought Michigan State would go in there and cover, and they got rolled.
Oh yeah, no, I thought they would too. Yeah. I think we were both in agreement on that one.
Yeah.
We were definitely under. But yeah, Penix is. You can definitely make the argument at this point that he has been among the best, if not the best, transfer quarterback in college football.
What to that? Let's spend a minute or two, not long, on that topic. Are there any transfer portal?
This is one of your topics, so we can 100% do that.
Yeah. Yes, and I don't want to dedicate too much time to it, but off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of transfer. Caleb Williams has looked solid. You could say he's been the best, which wouldn't shock anybody. Mm-hmm. I might say Jackson Dart has looked better. He's looked really good. Dylan Gabriel's looked good. And
again, who have they played?
Yeah, exactly. Granted, he only played one game, really, but Quinn Ewers looked good in the little bit he played. But I won't put Quinn Ewers ahead of Penix just because for how little he's played, he doesn't deserve that yet.
Right.
Right. Honestly, I list after Williams and Dart, Penix probably would be my third at this point. For guys that are in their first year at a new program,
we should definitely make the point and say that though he's been the most surprising because we expected Caleb Williams to do really well.
We did, and we expected Dart to do. We expected
Jackson Dart to do well.
We did.
Yeah, and there's that whole the controversy that was going on, the quarterback controversy with Ole Miss. With whatever the other dude was, the guy that was already there, the backup.
Luke Altmaier. Yeah.
Yeah, Luke Altmaier. So you had that. I mean, was that ever a competition? Really?
I don't
legitimately.
Think so. I think
I don't think it was either.
Yeah. Another interesting one, you could who's looked, I wouldn't say as good as Penix, but coming from the FCS level, Cam Ward at Washington State has done some good things, done some not so good things too. Yeah. They had a big win at Wisconsin.
No, you're right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Wisconsin game is exactly what I was about to go to was because I put on that tape. I had heard stuff. I remember seeing some guy, I think it was one of the PFF people. They've been trying to hype up all these quarterbacks here lately. That's just been driving me nuts. And one of the guys, Cameron Ward is like making a case for the first overall pick. And I was like, here we go again. I think this was 2 weeks ago.
No, yes.
And this was before the Wisconsin game. And they're like, oh yeah, this is his season. He's going to break. No. no, he's I guess if everything comes together perfectly, and he has a Joe Burrow kind of year next year,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe he could be the first overall pick. But no, it's one of those. It's just like this week. It's JJ McCarthy is the flavor of the
Yeah.
week.
He is.
So
Another one who's been
nonstop with them.
a big surprise for me, and that's where after this but you still there, John?
Yeah, it cut out for a second.
Okay. But Austin Reed has looked really good and been a surprise at Western Kentucky. And I say that with the caveat of whoever's starting at QB, we would have figured to look good in their offense. We just thought it was going to be Jared Dagey, not Austin Reed. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Daggy's not even there anymore. Daggy went down to Troy, right?
He did, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with him, I watched him against who was it they played? Austin P. Week 0.
Yep.
That's the only time I've watched Western Kentucky this year so far. No, I guess I was watching a little bit against Indiana this past week too. I didn't watch much of that game, but I saw some pieces. I think around the third quarter. So, but from what I had seen, I'm not impressed with the arm. The arm just
Yeah.
it's the NFL scout in me, I guess. Just sitting there kind of going, I don't see,
I think that's fair.
I don't see it with him.
They have FIU tomorrow, so we'll see how that goes.
Oh, well, that should be a pretty easy win. That's one of the worst programs in all of college football right now.
They are rough, yeah.
No, so my third pick, and this one I was debating it a little bit, but I kind of looked at it and I figured this is a good point to kind of bring on here, and maybe I'll be wrong. Who knows? This is kind of my risque, I guess. Clemson 7.5-point favorites over Wake Forest. I like Clemson in this, and the reason is every year with Clemson that they've been really good. They've started it undefeated and they've gone off to the start and they're ranked high and everything's going blah blah blah. We always sit here and we look at, oh well, the problem right now is the quarterback. They shouldn't be playing that quarterback. Oh, they have issues. They have weaknesses. We're always talking about the weaknesses of Clemson. I am definitely one of the loudest people always about the weaknesses of Clemson. I can't stand that program. I haven't ever been able to since Dabo got there. I can't stand Dabo. But I preface by saying that because I've done this every year where I've sat there and gone, they're going to lose this game. This is a big game. They're going to lose it, right? Because, the quarterback's not good. Back when it was Kelly Bryant and Trevor Lawrence was the true freshman. Oh, they're going to lose this game to whoever it was they were playing. That it was week 5. It was right around this time, where they had a big game, ranked opponent. And what happens? Kelly Bryant gets hurt. Trevor Lawrence comes in, takes him back, wins the game. It's Trevor Lawrence's show after that. Now, I'm not saying DJ Uyunglele gets hurt in this game. That's not at all what I'm saying. What I'm saying is Clemson always finds a way to figure it out. We talk about this every year. They go into a big game like this, and they usually cover.
Yeah.
And so,
your anti-Dabo rant to me is wild. I want to know more about this. Why you have not liked him since he's taken over?
He feels like a con man to me.
Aren't most of them at that level? And the ones that aren't are just hiding it better.
He just strikes me the wrong way. I don't like the guy. I don't like his attitude. I don't like a lot of the things that he has to say. I don't like a lot of his opinions. And,
okay. There is one man in the last, I will say, I'll let you get back to that. In the last 25 years, I would probably say there's one man that's done a better coaching job than him. He's done a very, very impressive job at Clemson as head coach. I know you're not saying that.
I'm not saying that at all. No,
I think it was
more of my issue with him was the whole anti, we don't cheat. We get our players, 100% the right way. And you have the whole scandal where they're funneling money through that church back when it was still illegal to pay them, and nobody would ever talk about it. Like that is something that legit would happen. All the recruits that didn't take the money would talk about it afterwards. And he would just kind of parade around like he was, oh, I'm this great Christian guy and blah blah blah, this and that. And I don't appreciate that, And it's when you're constantly trying to hide all your issues and you're trying to hide all the things that you're doing wrong, while trying to parade and masquerade around like you're this great Christian person. As a Christian, I just don't appreciate that, right? So, and it's I can't do anything wrong. It's not my fault. He's never really been one who's been good at accepting responsibility, and I think that always bothers me about coaches too. Where and then there's the hyperbole too with Deshaun Watson. Yeah, Deshaun Watson was a great player, but shouldn't have won the Heisman that year.
No, he should not
have. Not that year. He's the greatest player in the country and he should be the first overall pick, and no, he should not have been. And I'm not saying that in hindsight, looking at him as that's another thing too, is you had Deshaun Watson there who was pulling the same exact stuff, back then that he pulled. He got caught, with all the massage therapists.
I was reading someone recently saying, well, the Browns had the first pick in the year he was in the draft, and he should have went there as the first pick at the time. Nobody at the time was saying he should have been the first pick.
Mitchell Trubisky was the number one guy, and we thought that Patrick Mahomes had a chance to be good. Yeah. We didn't see Patrick Mahomes being a god.
No, nobody was even saying Mahomes would have been the number one pick. Yeah, and to the Browns' defense, they absolutely hit a home run drafting Myles Garrett. The guy's an animal. He's an absolute stud. Yeah.
And so actually, back then, there was that year in the Cleveland facility, they brought in Mitch Trubisky to do a workout, and there were some things that came up that convinced a lot of those coaches in that locker room that they could not hire or they could not draft this guy. Okay. And that was the plan, was to draft Mitch Trubisky number one. That was the plan in March. And several of the coaches basically threatened to quit if they took him. And this, if you remember, this is Hugh Jackman's first year. He had just assembled this coaching staff. They were like saying, look, if you don't take Myles Garrett, if you don't take the guy that we all want to get, we'll just leave. We'll just quit. We'll resign. And that was what prevented the Browns from taking Mitch Trubisky. True story.
I didn't. I honestly knew especially with their assistant coaches, I did not know that. But I'm not as plugged into the NFL circles in that sense at all. So,
but no, I think the whole thing is that my whole issue with Dabo has been just I'm a great person, I'm a great guy, blah blah blah, this and that. Well, why do you? If you're really that great, then you hid a lot. You've hidden a lot of stuff and covered for a lot of people that have ended up getting caught in later on in the future and not done a good job. It's just, he just seems to be the worst of the worst to me personally. I can't stand the guy, but I think they cover 7.5 over Wake Forest tomorrow. Yeah. So put my personal biases and hatred aside and recognize the fact that this is a very good coach, a very good program.
Yeah.
We do this every year. We talk about, they're not going to do it, blah, blah, blah. They're going to lose this game. Then they win it handedly. I think that's what happens tomorrow.
Yeah, they were down last year relative to where they had been, but the second half of the year, they were also one of the hottest and most consistent teams in the country.
Yeah, they were on top of it.
They ended the year extremely well.
And I think the thing too with them is Cade Klubnik should be playing quarterback right now. He really should. Especially because when DJ Uyunglele is in there, I loved DJ when he was coming out. I thought he looked great as a freshman. I was expecting these great things from him. This 1-2 arms race between him and Bryce Young for college. That's what I was kind of expecting. And we didn't get that at all. We got a couple of good games his freshman year and the COVID year. And he's just not looked like the same guy at all. Like, he's been totally different.
He has.
He's held him back. He holds this offense. Look at all the points that were left on the board against Georgia Tech this year.
Yeah.
They should have scored. They should have been up 45, coming out of that third quarter. And it took Cade Klubnik coming in to get a couple touchdowns.
Yeah. Shipley's a good heck of a running back too. He's a good player.
He is, and totally underutilized, to be honest, in that offense. But I digress. I still think that they're going to figure it out. They're going to get it together. Wake Forest is going to fumble this thing away. I mean, look at how they had Liberty on the ropes at halftime last week. And they let Liberty get back in the game with a redshirt freshman quarterback that was kicked out of Tennessee for taking McDonald's money. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I also like Clemson to cover.
That's so your fourth game, good sir. Let's get on to your fourth game as we're starting to approach the hour point.
It pains me to say this. As most of you know, I am a current South Carolina Gamecock PhD student and ardent fan.
Yep.
I actually like Charlotte to cover the 22.5 points against us tomorrow. That is a very big spread. And Charlotte was awful the first couple of weeks, but Chris Reynolds is back, and he's a pretty good G5 QB. Also, the Gamecocks have not looked great, not by any stretch of the imagination this year. So I think with Reynolds back, Gamecocks certainly win this game, but I don't think they win by 23 or more points.
I have to disagree with you on this, and I'm going to put my first 5 points of the show
Fair enough
here on this game. And so I've watched Charlotte a couple times this year, and every time I put them on, they've against Florida Atlantic. I understand they lost the quarterback. He left the game with an injury.
Yes,
but every time that I have watched Charlotte this year, they have been terrible. Looked bad on defense. They've looked bad on offense. Everything just is falling apart there. And so I have no confidence in them covering any spread at this point, especially with South Carolina. So South Carolina is pissed off right now. They're ticked off. They want to get this thing rolling. And, taking the loss like they did to Arkansas week 2 and then having the brutal game where you have to take Georgia on the very next week. That's just brutal.
It was one of the.
They're looking to rebound.
It was one of the worst 4-hour experiences of my life. I was in the stadium for it.
Everything in that game, I mean, was rough. So, So,
and again, I think the Gamecocks win. They probably even win by a few scores. I just don't think it's by 23 or more points. So that's why I took Charlotte at 22.5.
See, I think that they're just gonna pour it on in this game.
I don't know if they have the ability to do that.
They're gonna give them everything they got.
Because they're going to be such a run-heavy team though when they're up, and they're not pushing them all downfield a lot. I don't know if running them up and
but you've got all those running backs, man. You've got all those running backs.
But again, that's going to kill time. That the game's going to go faster if it's about all the running backs.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I think that they have so many.
Believe me, I hope the Gamecocks win by 50. I hope they absolutely dominate.
That's almost my expectation. Is it's going to be like 45-10 or something like that. I think they covered 22 easy. So I'm going to put my 5 points on that. 100%.
Fair enough. Yep.
100%. Okay. So my game 4 is, as you can see, wearing the Tennessee swag today because we won last week. Woohoo! But we're 3-0. We're going into this. Florida is not that bad of a team. Florida is 10.5-point underdogs to Tennessee. I think they cover this really easy. Not Tennessee, Florida. I am taking the enemy. Yes. This is a really good team. Anthony Richardson's good. I think Florida really got caught last week looking ahead. I think between them and there's another team that really struggled and almost lost a game. Who was it? Refresh my memory. That shouldn't have. Arkansas. Arkansas almost lost to
Arkansas almost lost
Missouri State.
Coached by Bobby Petrino now, yes.
Right, Bobby Petrino's returned to Arkansas.
Yep. He did.
But I think both of those teams kind of got caught looking ahead to the next game because Arkansas's got Texas A&M. Florida knew they had Tennessee. And this is a huge game for Tennessee to show everybody exactly what they had. But we've got a really good idea of what they are when they played Pitt.
Yeah.
And they should have lost that game to Pitt. 100%.
Yes, they probably should have. Yeah.
There were three different opportunities in the fourth quarter that Pitt was not able to cash in on. And that's why that game went to overtime. Three different opportunities. And so I don't have a lot of confidence in Tennessee pulling this off because of that. And because we've seen what Florida is. When they played Utah, we saw how gritty that team can be.
They're tough
things
on
went
D.
wrong poorly in the Kentucky game.
Yeah.
But I like Florida covering 10.5. I think it's going to be really close.
I'm how do I say this? I'm very rarely snarky and an asshole, but I'm going to ask a question now that might come off that way. You said earlier in that talk that Anthony Richardson was good. Is he? By what metric is he good?
Yes.
What has he done well so far this year? He's not thrown a touchdown pass yet.
He faked the throw on a he faked the throw on a 2-point conversion.
Okay. He
was a Heisman type moment there. Come on.
Oh,
come on, man.
Boy, the best meme I've thrown out this season was in week 2, and it was the grandma walking with the granddaughter and the grandma saying, in week 1, Anthony Richardson was a Heisman candidate, and the granddaughter, let's get you back to bed, grandma, because that's where I'm at with him right now. He looked really good. He looked good against Utah. Absolutely. He has not thrown the ball well since then. He's not been accurate. Yeah. I don't think his decision making has been terrible. I just don't know if it's been as quick as it could be to get that opening right when it's there. He's not bad. I think he might be able to get to where some people see him. He's just not anywhere near the finished product yet. But he shouldn't be either. He's not started enough yet, and people might have had unrealistic expectations for him to be there right away.
Yeah, so he's not a top 5 pick, right? Like PFF had him listed. I'm gonna shit on PFF as much as I can on this show. That's just how I feel about
He's
them.
not a draft pick at this point.
No, he's not. He's not. It's bad. It's bad. But I like him, as a developmental guy if he stays and keeps with it, because I mean, he's got that Cam Newton body. That Cam Newton body is just so attractive. You know what I'm saying? Like as a quarterback that you want to put in there, someone who's as athletic as he is. He's wearing the 15. They pulled the 15 out of the rafters at Florida just for him. I mean, like, it's everything that you want. But yeah, the consistency, you're right, it has to be there. I think that Tennessee is such a big rivalry game. This is one of the biggest games, for both teams every year. I think that for Tennessee, it's the biggest game. For Florida, it's the second biggest because Georgia being the biggest.
This is a big game for Josh Heupel at Tennessee as well. He's not had one this big with so many expectations on him yet. If they come out,
I can't tell you when the last time Tennessee was favored by 10.5 in this game. Can you ever remember seeing a spread like that?
Probably one of the years when Peyton Manning was there and lost. Yeah, because he never beat Florida. But those were the Spurrier years where they were really. But those were the Spurrier years where Florida was really legit too.
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess my point is I really think that Florida is going to cover that spread. I think this is going to be like a 3-point game. I think Florida's got a good chance to win. Honestly, I just do. That defenses look great.
This is one of those games I looked at, and right away, every week I say this about a game. I looked at it like I'm not touching this game because I definitely like Tennessee to win. I absolutely
I like Tennessee. Win. I like Tennessee winning. So what's funny is I'm better right now on ESPN. I'm better picking spreads than I am picking straight up.
Interesting.
By 3 games.
Okay.
Yeah, I've never had this happen before. I'm normally way better at picking straight up, but so I'm 3 games better on the spreads. So my opinion is probably not as relevant here, but I like Florida covering and I like Tennessee winning.
Okay.
I just don't think that Tennessee wins by 10.5. I think this is a very close game. This might come down to another, freaking Hail Mary in the back of the end zone.
If it was
You know what I'm
9.5,
saying? It's that kind of magnitude game.
and for me, this was like I said, it was a game I'm not touching because if I were to pick one way or the other, I might pick Tennessee to cover this one. I think they're that solid, but it's not a game that I was going to pick at all. I saw it and I'm like, I'm staying away from that.
So what's kind of funny is you tend to jump into these games in the Big Ten that I look at. I'm like, I'm not touching that at all. I don't want to touch that. And I tend to pick these games in the SEC where you look at and you're like, I'm not touching that. You know, it's like I think it's like your Big Ten understanding, my SEC understanding.
It's probably a regional bias for us for
causes
sure. Or at
us
least
to look at those matchups differently.
Yeah. Absolutely. Maybe if not a bias, at least a familiarity to who they are and the history there. Not that history should come too much in these picks.
Your final pick this week.
This is an interesting one. No team has had a more interesting week than the Arizona State Sun Devils. They fired Herm, which is well overdue. You mentioned Sapient before. When I wrote coaches on the hot seat, he was right near the top of that list. Scott Frost was number one. He was already gone. So Herm was on the list. And that was more so, not that Arizona State's been terrible. He actually ended with a winning record. But with the scandal going on, and I knew last offseason when so many of their assistant coaches jumped ship, that's not a good sign. Other people,
it wasn't just assistant coaches, like the players went with them too.
A lot of them too.
They lost a ton of talent.
We see teams lose guys though, but we don't see teams lose that many coaches from a P5 program to taking other jobs like that. And that told me that what's that?
I said unless you're Clemson.
John? But that was for a good reason, because they got promotions. These guys took lateral job movements.
I know. Yeah.
These guys took lateral jobs.
I'm throwing shade at Clemson. Let me have my fun.
I know you were. Yeah. But when all those assistants were leaving in the midst of a well-publicized NCAA investigation, I felt like the writing was on the wall, and it was a mistake for Arizona State to go into the season with Herm. I think in that case, you cut your losses and come to a separation with the coach, any coach, not Herm specific. Whenever you have a situation like that where it looks like the investigation is not going to come down in your favor, you move on from the source, in this case, the head coach. But so they did. So Arizona State fired Herm, as we all know. Robert Aguado, the running backs coach, will be the interim. He was a very successful high school head coach in Arizona before that. Number of state titles, top programs. He coached N'Keal Harry in high school, and 3 of his running backs are at different P5 teams now. I saw that this week. But he also talked about a few things they're going to do now with the offense more. He said they're going to try to do more RPO, like your quarterback's Emory Jones. Why were you not doing that in the first place?
Because it wasn't Herm's MO.
That's true. But, and this is me building up, going against my norm. There's 2 schools of thought. When you fire a head coach, some people, like the Sharps last week, were all over Nebraska. They thought
I was not.
I know you weren't.
No.
But it's the thought is it's going to turn things around. It's going to rejuvenate the troops. They're going to show up. The other thought is the wheels are going to fall off even more. It's going to become a train wreck, and everything is going to go downhill. And I think especially in the transfer portal era now, things will go downhill more because all those players are going to be looking for where they need to be, which is a long way of saying I'm going absolutely against the grain, and I'm picking the Sun Devils to cover the 16.5 points against Utah.
Dang.
Because I think that spread is so big for what we've seen out of Utah so far. And if Arizona State can even get a little bit more out of Emory Jones and do some good things. And for 2 P5 teams that aren't, neither one of them is an absolute dominant juggernaut. That's a really big spread for, teams where the talent is. Utah's more talented, but the disparity is not as big as I don't think what that spread would lead to think.
So we saw Utah play a really bad game against Florida. Well, it wasn't a bad game, but it wasn't
really bad. They lost to a decent team.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, but it was definitely not their best game. I guess is what I mean. They made a lot of mistakes in that game.
1,000% true.
We saw them follow that up with a 73-7 win over Southern Utah and a 35-7 win over San Diego State.
Yeah.
So I think the bet here is on the Utah defense holding up and not allowing many points against Arizona State in this match. And I think also, partially, I think Nebraska getting blown out the way that they did last week against Oklahoma has also influenced the spread a little bit, probably pushed it up.
Probably, yep.
I like Utah. So I'm going to throw another 5 points on there. Okay. Oh, I like them to cover.
You like them to cover. Okay, that's.
I like them to cover. Yeah, no, I knew you weren't picking them to win.
Yeah,
but I like them to cover. So I'm going to throw another 5 points on that.
Fair.
And it's because this is a really good offense. Yeah. This is a very good offense. And Cameron Rising.
Yep.
Cameron Rising is a very interesting quarterback. He's not.
He is.
So yeah. I think he's going to end up at the Senior Bowl. So we'll have a whole thing, a whole time to study about him. I know the Senior Bowl really likes him. And they consider they look at him very highly. So there's some NFL teams that look at him very highly too. Maybe I'm guessing as a backup quarterback. I don't think anybody sees starter material out of this guy right now. But he's an interesting quarterback. He's got a really interesting skill set, and they utilize it really well. And I like that about Utah. I like their defense. Their defense is really stout. They have a lot of pieces across the board. And I also don't like what Arizona State's done this year. I know that Herm's gone now, new head coach, but I think that's part of the problem is you have a ton of transfers that came in because this is a completely different team, than it was last year. This is almost a totally different starting lineup. And we're looking at these other guys that transferred out of this program last year, like Johnny Wilson at Florida State right now is killing it. Killing it. Where was he? Why wasn't he on the field at Arizona State? It's like, man, they were really misusing a lot of the talent. It makes me wonder how well they've self-scouted themselves. So I think that's why I like them. I think Utah could win by 17 easily. I think it's more like 21, might be 24.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah. I thought that might be one of the games where you'd put 5 on.
Yeah, as soon as I saw that, I was like, no. Yeah. I've actually got a bet on that too. So I better not be wrong on that. Because in early bet, when you're looking at the spreads and you want to hit them before they start to move around and shift. So, my final pick is kind of an obscure game, I guess you could call it, but really the Sun Belt, we shouldn't be looking at the Sun Belt as an obscure conference anymore because this conference has been really damn competitive this year.
Yeah.
They've taken down Texas A&M. They've been competitive against a lot of different opponents up in the top. But Texas A&M being the biggest one, Appalachian State taking them down. They took down Nebraska, with a, Georgia Southern running that spread offense with a, triple option offense like we've talked about on here before. Yeah. They are becoming a force in the group of 5. I think that they are really making a push to be one of the better conferences, if not the best conference. They're pushing for on the American big time, in my opinion. Because look, the Sun Belt has so many great teams across the Coastal. Looked great last night. I don't know if you watched them against Georgia State. Coastal looked awesome.
No, I was watching West Virginia, Virginia Tech last night.
Yeah, I had all 3 games on my 3-screen setup. I'm gonna go set it up as soon as I'm done here. But I'm really, really happy with that. It's really nice. But so basically, I'm going into the Sun Belt. I like James Madison, a new Sun Belt edition, first year in the FBS. 6.5-point underdogs, Appalachian State. Now this sounds crazy because Appalachian State is 2-1. They ended up in a big giant shootout with North Carolina. They took down Texas A&M and then won in a absolute miracle fashion last week against Troy. And I think that's what I'm looking at. So last week there was all that emotional win over Texas A&M. Game day comes into town, deservingly so, very deservingly so. Game day definitely deserved to be there. So game day goes into town, and then you get behind, and you're about to lose to Troy, and you somehow get the ball back, and you heave this Hail Mary short of the end zone. It gets deflected, and fans rush the field because it's caught, and you score a touchdown, and there's so much emotion there. It's so hard. People don't understand. In college football, it is so hard to win two big, giant emotional games like that and come back and play another really good game.
It is.
It's so hard, and there's so much looming over the program too. It amps up the pressure. It amps up the expectations. James Madison is quietly taking care of business. They beat MTSU week 1. They very, very soundly. I didn't see that one coming at all. They destroyed MTSU. And MTSU is not a terrible, terrible football team.
No, not at all.
Now they're coming off a bye. And so those factors all combined, I really like James Madison in this matchup. They are a very tough, physical team. They're built in the trenches. They're built to withstand and keep the ball. That's their game plan. So kind of, I guess, what Appalachian State did to Texas A&M. I like them to cover 6.5. I think that they might actually win the game outright.
Yeah, I think that's fair. They've done a lot of good things. We've seen Todd Centeio, Thornton. They've thrown the ball well. JMU
Centeio looks better than he ever has.
He has.
Yeah. That offense is suited to him perfectly.
Yeah, but I have no problems with that pick. Yeah.
So 10 points on the line this week.
Yep.
That means, that's a big deal for us.
And it's interesting. Both games are. I picked the heavy underdog to cover,
and I took the favorite.
Yeah, and you picked the favorite to cover. So, one thing I always enjoy the latter part of our time. We have a very fun day of FCS football tomorrow. A few really big games in that world. Out west, late at night, we have Weber State, UC Davis playing. And Weber State, perennial playoff team. UC Davis has been a playoff team the last few years. Dan Hawkins is their head coach now, former Boise State, Colorado head coach. And then we have Montana State, runner-up last year, going to the red turf and playing Eastern Washington in a big game. But I think the biggest game of the week, and we could almost always pick a Missouri Valley game as the game of the week. The conference. But I am picking, in fact, a team we vaguely mentioned earlier, South Dakota State, Jackrabbits, always top-notch. I think they're ranked number 2 right now. They're going to Missouri State, fresh off of Missouri State's battle with Arkansas.
Oh, boy.
So I think that's a good game.
It's a big game.
Yeah, so I'm gonna pick out of those 3. I think I'm gonna go Jackrabbits and Bears as the FCS game of the week.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the FCS game of the week. But it's really interesting that you brought up Weber State and UC Davis, because UC Davis has a lot of guys that are NFL people.
Okay.
Or at least potential NFL people.
Yeah.
They got a really nice tight end down there. I can't think of the names right now because I don't have them in front of me. But I was looking at them. I was studying specifically this week, working on some different projects over there at NFLDraftBlitz.com. But
nice.
they have several guys that looked really good and were very intriguing skill types that definitely have a shot at the NFL. And as for, like you said, like the Missouri, that conference is just
but awesome. two of those teams we talked about, UC Davis, they went to South Dakota State in week 2, and South Dakota State beat them 24-22. So that was a battle until the end of the game, and 2 teams that both should be in the playoffs and expect to make decent runs there later on in the year.
Oh yeah. FCS, man, that's where it's at. It's really amazing too when you look at how much that part of the sport has evolved over the last 5 years.
Yeah,
it's like it's starting to matter. That's great for that level. HBCU's getting all the attention now too. I think
getting a lot.
That I think
It's
that
funny.
the NFL, starting the HBCU Combine last year, and then the HBCU Legacy Bowl being started, ironically at the same time as the Combine, I think. Might be year 2 for them. I can't remember. I think it was the same year they both
I
started.
think so. I want to say it was. Yeah, the biggest detriment to the HBCUs is that they don't participate in the playoffs because basically it's just Grambling and Southern get all that money for the Bayou Classic, and I had this talk with a mutual friend of ours recently, and who was all about Coach Prime. And Dion's done wonders at Jackson State. He's got them on the map. He's the reason we're seeing HBCUs all over. Competitive wise, those conferences aren't even anywhere near the Missouri Valley. They're not top 10 teams. You look, Jackson State played one good team last year. They got destroyed late in the year in that game.
Yep.
So, but because of how well they're recruiting and growing, they're going to steadily get better, and that's great to see. Like, we're going to see.
I think the biggest thing that's helped their recruiting is all the NFL attention.
Yep, probably.
And I think that's good for the sport overall because, these were schools, they have players that come out here and there. And definitely some of the NFL greats came from HBCU schools.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole laundry list of guys that are in the Hall of Fame that came out of those schools. I mean,
kind of a different ballgame, though. Those guys really weren't welcome at SEC schools back then.
That's also true. Yeah, that's also true. But it's like that. They're bringing that sort of tradition, that sort of pride in that back, and I think that's good.
And I think they're also doing a good job, like you just mentioned. They're connecting those old NFL legends to the schools, and I think that's very beneficial to their missions right now.
Yeah, 100%. And just the more NFL chances that you create for players, the more opportunities that you create for guys to go out there and show what they're going to do, it helps the sport.
Yeah,
100%. And it doesn't matter how you do it or where that opportunity is or anything, it helps the sport. And so, like the Coach Prime, he did not pull the number 1 overall recruit in the country this year because, we're an HBCU school. It's because you can legitimately become an NFL player now playing through the HBCUs, And so as much as, that pride and that thing, and I know that helps and influences a lot of guys to go there, that's the real big thing that they need to keep continuing to push is that you can legit get to the NFL. This is a legitimate path. This is something that we're going to take very seriously, and you can really show off over here.
Legitimate, maybe, but it is harder because how many of them were drafted last year?
Like 1 or 2. Yeah,
I don't know that it was.
I guess my point is, I'm getting into what I'm trying to get into. With the point is, you're building up through recruiting, and we're going to see. Because of these opportunities that were presented, it's going to take 5-6 years for it to settle in, but we're going to start seeing a whole lot of guys coming out of these schools.
Yeah,
and I mean a whole lot. It might be sooner because of the transfer portal, but
and I'm less for me. I'm not I obviously love the NFL draft, pay attention, but I'm not as connected to it, and I don't enjoy that aspect of it as much as you do. For me, being almost a more pure college guy, I would really like to see those teams participate in the playoffs and send their conference champions to the playoffs. I think that would be, and it's not just the Ivy League doesn't do it either, and the Ivy League should because they, we've seen Harvard, Princeton, Dartmouth all have solid teams in recent years. So it would be
Browns looks pretty good right now.
Yeah, so it would be nice for all the FCS schools or conferences to send their champion to the playoffs.
That would be nice, but that's a wonderful dream world that we live in. Hughes. That's just we can. The Ivy League schools are too good for the rest of the FCS. So
I would say I think that HBCU conferences will do it before the Ivy League does.
100%. Yeah, they're going to have to at some point, and I think it's going to be once they really start getting this influx of talent. We've started to see it with the transfer portal. Like Jackson State pulled a ton of really good guys. Grambling pulled a few. I mean. You start to bring Tennessee State's another one. You bring in NFL guys.
Florida
you bring in NFL guys to the program.
We've talked about Florida A&M with Isaiah Land, and
Isaiah Land is a fun prospect. So,
and now we have some of the HBCUs leaving the MEAC and going to conferences with PWIs, predominantly white institutions. So
Mm-hmm.
those HBCUs potentially could be in the playoffs if they're winning their conference and doing that. So,
and I think they're going to get a really good shot with, I'm telling you, man. It's just like when Odell made that catch 8 years ago. Everybody wanted to play wide receiver after that. And what did we see? We saw this crazy influx in the last 2 NFL drafts of receiver talent. Like the receiver talent, their depth the amount of talent that you have to get drafted, first of all, at wide receiver now is immensely more than it was. And you see these guys coming out in the 5th, 6th, 7th rounds playing immediately at a high level. And that's why, because there's so much more talent at that position right now than what there used to be. And you can trace it back to Odell's catch 8 years ago when he made that awesome catch on Sunday Night Football, and we've not ever forgotten it. And George Pickens went out there last night and pulled one pretty darn similar to it, just saying. But point is, it's because the opportunity was presented. A superstar was born on that catch. Kids saw that. They wanted to go do it. What's going to happen is you have a whole nother combine and a whole nother all-star game separated for these schools. Kids are gonna recognize that. They're gonna recognize, hey, I might be a 2-3 star prospect, but I can get all this extra attention just because I went to these schools. They're gonna go, and that's gonna help the game.
Will the draw and the magnetism to those schools decrease when Coach Prime takes an FBS job? I think it will a little bit. For those schools, filling that vacuum will be critical.
Yeah, no, that'll be very difficult to fill because he is one of the premier leaders. You listen to the guy. You can say what you want about him, and he's done wonderful things with the program, like we talked about.
Absolutely, yeah.
He's just not for everybody. You know what I'm saying? Like some of the stuff that he says is really cheesy. He had these like fake beatitudes that he was quoting in their game that they showed on the ESPN broadcast from the locker room when they played Florida A&M this year, where he was like, "Blessed are those who catch the ball. Blessed are those who get a sack." Different. It was like, okay, like I kind of get it, but you got it. The whole point of the beatitudes was there's a promise that follows it. What's the promise?
I got it. Yeah.
That's my Christian theologian coming out right there. But I mean, like, everybody knows Deion's about Deion. Deion right now is about his sons, which are Sanders. They're playing very well in that program. Shader looks like he's a really good quarterback. Yeah. He's a very decent prospect. He's gonna, as soon as he gets the opportunity, like maybe Florida State opens up if things don't end well for Norvell this year, he'll bolt.
They sure look good so far.
They look great so far, but we'll see how we know how Florida State's been over the last few years. As soon as it starts to look good, something happens, it goes south, and
they're another team that ended last year all right though. They turned it around after the real poor showings early on.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Well, that looks like that's about the wrap up here of Gridiron Eve. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to check us out next week. Next week, we will also find out if we are indeed tied again for the 3rd consecutive week in points. We do have that opportunity if we split these picks, or who will have the advantage. It's kind of a nice little thing to do. So it was nice because I had the lead week 0. I took a big lead, and then you caught right back up.
Yep.
And we've been tied ever since, splitting them every week. It's been great. So someone will eventually have to be declared the champion. I know we have several weeks ahead. And also shout out to our buddy Thor because this is our game week. And you have picked Thor to beat me in fantasy football. And it is a pick'em game. 2-3.
John did beat me. John did beat me handily last week. It was a very poor showing from my squad. Almost nobody. I was very salty earlier talking about Tank Bigsby not getting any touches because he was one of my players who did not.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because if you held on to Brock Bowers, who I traded to you, you might have actually had a chance because he went for what, 45 points or something like that.
It was in the 30s, high 30s. I remember that because I looked at it after. Yeah. Even then, though, I still wouldn't have been like everybody was so poor on my team. Will Rogers had a off game
Yeah,
by
he
his
had a very
standards and what we expect.
dismal showing. And I think Chance Cunningham ended up outscoring him by a good 10 points on the bench.
Did, yes.
I'm sorry,
It was like 15. It was like 15 points almost. Yeah.
I'm sorry. It was
all right,
it was
yeah.
fun. It was very fun. But
to your
I
notion,
hope
you said I say to your notion, you said we might be tied. I think if it does come to the point where we are tied late in the year, maybe when we have week 15 or the conference championship week, we pick 3 games. That way we cannot end tied.
we'll have to we'll have to figure that out. But
Yeah.
yeah, thank you all for tuning in. This has been Gridiron Eve. We'll be back next week at this time and going over what went right, what went wrong, and what to look forward to in week 5. He's Mike Huesmann. I'm John Vogel. Thanks for tuning in, and you all have a great rest of your night.